Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, I'm Nathan Bell. Joining me, as always, Zach Bartles. Zach, what is going on, my friend?
Well, man, I am podcasting, wait for it, outside.
Ooh.
And I'm enjoying a nice Monte Cristo cigar, and it got me thinking about one Joe Thorne, who I've got a beef with right now.
Okay. Talk to me about that.
I don't know. Well, did you hear their bonus episode they did about the Twitter blow up about whether David is a rapist?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about that whole issue because it's been done to death. Although, by the way, having stood right where David looked down and been there with Cliff Graham, who was parsing it all out, and seen right where the Mighty Men's homes were now being excavated, I think I have some great insight to it, but I'm not even going to bother I don't want to enter the fray. My thing is, he was complaining about how everybody was being so shrill and mean, and he got to the end of the episode, and he said, there were some people who were, kind and listened. Not everybody went to 11. And immediately I was triggered. And, I mean, there's a 99.9% chance that he was not taking a shot at us. But that 0.1 is still there, and that's enough for a reformed podcast feud, I think.
That's right. That's all we need, man, is that 0.1% to jump into it.
In fact, I don't even need that. I just need the promise that people will get worked up into a lather. So we're coming for you, guys. They're in whatever the name of the suburb of Chicago that they're in. We're going to find what it is, and we're going to map quest it, and we're headed your way.
That's right. And we're going to.
Let me ask you this, man. If you could go into the ring, if you had to step into the ring with one of the two guys, with you probably like MMA, right? Who would you go? Who would you pick?
I would have to go Thorne just because he's smaller.
Yeah, I thought you might say that, and I wouldn't.
Okay. Talk to me about that.
Even though, I mean, first of all, Jimmy is he's physically much bigger than me, but he's a sweetheart. Like he's a teddy bear guy. You can tell that. And so you've got that probably like even if he got me pinned to the ground, he wouldn't pace me for too long. But I think that Joe Thorne, despite being much smaller in stature than either of us, it's just like he's one of those guys. He's like a Tyler Durden, man. He would be a whirlwind. He would be unstoppable. He would never stay down, And I think
the Tasmanian devil of the Reformed community. I
think so. I think if it came down to it, it would be. I would rather get in the ring with Ferdy than Joe Thorne. I mean, I think something about all that cigar smoke has hardened his sinews and muscles. All that tattoo ink. Yeah,
it's like our armor,
right? Oh man, I love those guys, and but I'm coming for them, and it's on now.
Oh man, well, someone who's not on your list this week, dude, is our good friends at Missional Wear. Tell us about Missional Wear.
Oh, my gosh, dude. So Jeff came through like a champ. It was I've been, we have the fun little playful banter.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been complaining a bit that my busts had not arrived super promptly. And Jeff realized this, and he just packed this package full, which is a kind thing to – and honestly, at the end of the day – well-deserved thing for a guy who's had 3 podcasts, all of which have promoted Missional Wear. I'll tell you what, dude. Jeez, this stuff is so cool. I've gotten a number of packages. I've actually bought a bunch of stuff from them, and it's funny, that stuff comes really quick. But this is the best kind of – I think it keeps getting better. This is the best shipment I've gotten. And what I want to I'm going to have stuff to talk about for weeks every time we do this segment.
Nice.
But these busts. Now, I had the option, I told you, of possibly being like amongst the very, very first people to get the like ivory coating.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did not.
Nice.
I'll describe them to you. They're a little smaller than I thought, and I was glad.
Okay.
Because I was thinking if they were enormous, it might look kind of weird where I was going to put them. And they are also very lightweight. So they're I don't know what they're. I mean, obviously, everyone knew these metal things are going to be hollow.
Right. Yeah.
They're not going to be something that you can pick up and smash your door down with or something.
It's not the shot put in track and field here.
Right. And if anyone was even thinking about shot putting with Calvin or Spurgeon, you're going to have to contend with me and Joe Thorne. So I had originally thought maybe I would put them on my desk to replace, I told you, my bar mitzvah bookends. Bar mitzvah bookends are still there because I think these things are so light that a book might tip into them and actually knock it off the desk, and that would suck.
Yeah.
So if you were thinking about doing, I mean, all you'd have to do is take like a regular like metal, like black library bookend, put it there to hold the book up, and then put this next to it. But I put it on a lighted shelf that's on my wall. So there's like lights shining down on both of these guys.
Nice.
And everyone who has ventured into my study in the last almost week since they've been there has, and you know, it's basically like walking into the religious tchotchke shop in Bethlehem when you come to my office. It's just chock full of the tchotchkes. It's tchotchke full. And people notice them right away. And they're like, ooh, wow, those are really cool. They're the kind of thing that you would expect to see dressing a set of like a mahogany and, leather office in a movie that takes place in the late 19th century amongst the very rich. You know,
nice.
A bust.
Yeah.
And these busts, they're just so sharp looking, and I am literally I'm more than 100% satisfied with them because they have exceeded my satisfaction, my expectations. I'm 155% satisfied with them. And I'll tell you what, all the waiting, it just made my heart grow that much more zealous for them. And the moment of unboxing, my wife said I was like a little child on Christmas morning.
Nice.
Pulling those things out of the box and setting Spurgeon down next to Calvin. And I don't know where, because the way I have it set up, it's just basically two alcoves, and one's on one side, one's on the other. But I'd like to add Luther to the mix because I'm getting more and more Lutheran all the time. And I may have to think that through.
Nice. Very cool.
So yeah, go to Missional Wear. There's so many of these things. Whoever your theological hero is, I mean, not if it's like Nadia Bolz-Weber or something, but if it's an actual like reformer or after the Reformation for a couple hundred years, even he's got the guys, and you should get in on this. It will punch up your. Get rid of the man cave. No, better yet, supplement the man cave with a true study. And one way to go true study is a leather desk blotter. Every man needs one of those.
Yep.
And another way is to get some busts. All of you, basically, you win then in a study measuring contest.
That's right.
You've got busts. You're the winner by default. And if one of them is Spurgeon, you won the whole thing. And I mean.
There's just no comparing at that point. There's no competing at that point.
There's nothing to be said. Yeah, like if you would have said to me 10 years ago, wouldn't it be cool to have a bust of Spurgeon and a bust of Calvin? I would have been like, oh my gosh, it'd be amazing, but I have no idea how. And if I found something like that on eBay, it would be $900 a piece, It is now well within your means. Go forth and click and tell them Nathan and Zach sent you.
That's right. All right. All the love to Missional Wear on that one. Now, before we transition into some of our topics, and I did say that plural, Zach, remind us a little bit about that little thing you got going on called a Kickstarter.
Oh, yeah, my Kickstarter. It's still at zacharybartles.com/audio, and that'll redirect you to the Kickstarter, and it's for my audiobook bundles. If you like suspense novels, especially with a kind of supernatural overtone. If you're somebody who appreciates the pairing of a clergy collar and a Glock 23,
who doesn't like that?
A lot of people. I don't so much anymore, but when those were kind of still in bookshelf or bookstores available for purchase, I got a number of I've been triggered emails about that. But oh well, you don't have to read them. But if you dig that kind of stuff. Yeah, the kind of, it's kind of mysteries. There's supernatural ones. There's some that are more about cons and heists and stuff like that. Not ramming the religious moral down your throat, with the cheesy, sappy scenes, but lifting up the gospel. I've been told pretty seamlessly. That's what most of the reviews seem to say. If you like Stephen James, he said you should read my stuff. If you like Ted Decker, he's never heard of me, but sometimes people tell me
he'll say you should read it if he had heard of you.
Right. If he had heard of me and read my stuff, actually he would be probably so intimidated that he would tell people not to read it.
Nice. How long is that Kickstarter up for, Zach?
Oh, there's 9 more days. So
nice. Time
is running short, and then later on you're going to be like, oh, I think I'll check those out. And then you'll realize it's way more expensive when the Kickstarter's done.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it'd be a nice year. Treat yourself.
That's right. And the good news, Zach, is that the thing is actually more than fully funded at this point, correct?
Oh, yeah, it is actually nearing double funded.
Yeah, so...
Because of largesse of Weebus.
Nice.
And the Burnhams, who are avid listeners of this show.
Yep. So, yeah, folks, definitely check it out. Guaranteed some great audiobooks from Mr. Zach Bartles. Awesome.
I mean, the guarantee is sort of implied, but there's not really a guarantee. I mean, if you hate them...
Right, yeah.
Tough.
You already bought them, and I got your money, sucker.
Not that, but that, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man. Well, dude, I want to shift gears a little bit and transition to a topic that had been going on with our main man, Jared, there on Facebook. Something that you and I actually talked about last July, was it correct? Last July?
Yeah, July of 2018.
Okay. And you guys had talked a little bit about, I saw it briefly, about something with communion and crackers and French bread and different modes. So why don't you go ahead, because like I said, I briefly saw it but didn't have time to kind of look through it. Just the general gist of what kind of followed through with some of the conversation and all that. We're going to talk a little bit about this, but just want to refer people back to our episode we did back in July of 2018 on this, because we went into it extensively. What's that?
I lost you there, man. Are you still there?
Oh yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me now?
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool.
And you could probably skip the stuff about how we predicted what Ant-Man would be about.
Yeah.
And go right to the communion stuff. It's funny that we pair this one very transient thing with the timeless until the end of the world.
We did another one. Didn't we do another one where we were talking about like The Rock and sanctification or something like that?
I like that. I think that it shows that there's place to discuss everything, and that you don't have to, in order to be holy, you don't have to spend all your time talking about church stuff.
That's right.
You're allowed to care about other stuff. And for guys like us who weren't like sussing out what happened in the big game yesterday,
right?
There are these movies. So I think what I wanted to pull away from this thing, this discussion on Jared's page, was something I don't think we got to last July, which is I want to throw you a very common kind of case study that you hear in youth ministry classes and that sort of thing. Okay. And it also kind of pops up in church competencies and theology type, practical theology. Yep. If you were, I know you've done youth ministry. I think you're doing youth ministry now. Say you are bringing a group of youth group somewhere, a group of youth, a group of youth members, children who are Christians. Yep. And part of what you've planned to do is you are going to be in a beautiful, beautiful location. Yep. And you thought it would be nice to have the Lord's Supper there. You've talked to the leadership of the church. In your case, the Reverend Dutcher. He has in turn checked with the Reverend James King to make sure it's okay.
That's right. Which it wasn't, by the way.
Right. But he just, he lives a very dangerous life. He goes against Dr. King.
That's right.
says, as a sacrament of the church or an ordinance of the church, you're acting on behalf of the church to lead this for the kids.
Yep.
So you get there, you open up your tote or whatever you brought, and you realize that you forgot the grape juice and whatever it is that you use, the bread element, the bread and the copper, both forgot.
Sure.
What you do have is, now how I've always heard it was stale donuts and flat Mountain Dew. That's usually how it's done. But I'm going to say, because in this scenario you've been sort of in camping or something, and this makes it less in your face, you've got some leftover graham crackers from s'mores, and you've got like some grape soda sitting there at room temperature, and you have enough to give it a little bit. Do you go ahead anyway and say, what we use doesn't really matter, even if it might strike some people as a little bit sacrilegious, or do you say, oh, darn, we wanted to do this, but we don't have the elements?
Yeah. I think part of that depends on how I build the trip. If the students are expecting communion, then to me, I think at that point, it's better to have the lesson of, we're doing this in remembrance and honor of Christ. And so redirecting the focus back to Christ, which is where it is anyway. I think in that case, yes, I go ahead and do it. Now, if the students have no idea this is what we're doing, let's say this was a conversation just between me and Greg, and the students really don't know it's coming. At that point, I might reconsider, and I can't exactly tell you why I might reconsider. I might still go ahead and do it, but I might reconsider at that point because the expectation isn't necessarily there. What I may do is when we get back to the church in that case, I may just say, hey, you know what? Before we go, I would like to hold communion for us as a way to kind of close out our trip. And so maybe do it when we get back to the church in that case. Okay. What are your thoughts on that, Zach?
Well, before I tell you mine, let me push it further then.
Okay.
You don't have something that like graham crackers that sort of resemble, actually very much resemble unleavened bread. Or anything that has a even artificial grape taste. You just have the stale donuts and the flat Mountain Dew.
Right. And so I guess in that case, I would say the same thing. I would focus more on if we had already set this up as this is what we're doing, I would really lean hard to push in on the students the representation of what we're doing as the body of Christ. It's, a bad deal. Then again, I may go ahead and be like, you know what? Why don't we wait till we get back and do it when we get back where all that stuff is available at the church? I think it's going to depend on if I'm thinking clearly or not in the moment. Having this time to plan it out and really think through it, that would be my answer, and so I might be prepared for it. But like if this was just thrown at me and the decision was there just right in front of me and I'm not necessarily thinking clearly, my hope would be in either situation, I'm bringing everyone back to this is the focus of what we're doing. And so what we have to represent those things, isn't as important as what we're actually doing in the representation of what we're doing. Go ahead and push back on that, Zach.
My thought was like, would there be anything that just felt like maybe even just borderline blasphemous about someone holding this kind of like bright green swill that we associate more with like scuzzy mustaches and extreme sports than anything else that doesn't look a bit like blood and saying, this is my blood.
Can I just amend it briefly as well and say I think it would also depend on the group that I had. I think in the moment I could assess, if I've got a group of students that are, and I think you might know where I'm coming from with this. If I've got a group of students who are more mature and they're able to handle something like that, I would be more likely to. But if I have a group of students that are not in that direction at all, and I think this is going to be more of a distraction than an actual representation of the Lord's Supper, then I would definitely nix it too.
Okay. Now, my thought here is, so what it came from was a funny little meme someone posted that said, like, your face you make when the communion cracker goes down the wrong pipe. And it was like some kind of Picasso-looking like guy grasping at his throat.
Right.
And I said, cracker? Come on, man. And he was like, yeah, every church I've ever been to is basically been a cracker. And it just got me thinking on this kind of thing. And the fact that we call it an ordinance in Baptist circles usually not because the word sacrament is bad, but because it's been misunderstood, I think. And there's a lot of baggage to it for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But ordinance means it's been ordained. And what Jesus ordained when he's in baptism and the Lord's Supper was go and baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, meaning use water. So like if you just had Mountain Dew, you wouldn't baptize somebody.
Yep.
And what he ordained in the Lord's Supper was, as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, do so in remembrance of me. So I don't think there's a legalistic slavery to, it has to be wine, but it does have to be the fruit of the vine, according to certain texts. At some point, you're not actually partaking of the ordinance. If you say, all right, we're going to eat a candy bar and drink a Red Bull. It's not Jesus' blood. He didn't say break a donut. Okay, it's still actually maybe a donut is better than leavened bread. Like some people use like Wonder Bread or whatever.
Right.
But maybe it was a jelly donut. You get if it was grape jelly, you get 2 in 1. I don't know, but at some point. On one side of the thing, I feel like the further you get away from the stuff that was in front of Jesus when he said, "This bread and this cup, do so in remembrance of me," the worse off you are. On the other hand, we don't want to be like super slavish about it. I don't like when I got to my church, they used regular bread, like French bread, and I was like, well, why don't we use unleavened bread? And we found a recipe. We've been doing that for 15 years almost now.
Yep.
And it seems to me like it's the most connected to what Jesus did. But I just recently also saw, and I reposted a little thing where there was a woman who had a grape allergy or some kind of thing where she couldn't have grape juice or wine. Right. And that her pastor would always put a little thing of water. And she would drink that, and his line was, Jesus already took care of, turning water into wine, so you're covered. And in that case, I think of like Rome saying it's not a legitimate host if it's gluten-free. So people who have a horrible gluten allergy are just out of luck. Jesus doesn't, offer them the grace that they think is inherent and intrinsic in the sacrament. I don't want to go to either of those extremes. Right. I feel like, though, calling it a cracker to me makes it seem childish. Having it be Mountain Dew, even if you have really mature believers, makes it seem really childish. And I want to always reinforce and instill that it is a serious thing we're doing here.
Yeah, and I think
my take on it.
Yeah, no, and I would agree with that, and that's why I think there are a lot of variables in doing that. I mean, I've planned over the years. I've planned a number of youth retreats, and honestly, I've never done communion on those, and a lot of that has just been intentional for a variety of reasons. Either the youth retreat was intended to be a mixed retreat with both believers and unbelievers, and so I didn't want to be doing this thing outside of the context of the church, where there, I think, is a more clear explanation with service, and so I didn't want that confusion in there. Another reason is because I was taking student leaders out, and so these were leaders who were helping within the youth group setting, but it was still they're still learning and growing in the church. And even in that case, I would rather let that be wrestled within the context of the greater body of Christ than at a youth group event. And so, when you kind of threw the question out, I was trying to rifle back in my memory to, have I ever even done it at an event like that? And I think I honestly haven't, for various reasons, because I think there is, and I'm not saying that it's wrong to do it, but I think there is something to be said of doing it within the greater body of who we're with in a area setting. Now I'm willing, I've been to many different churches. I actually was just thinking, if I've been to any churches that have closed communion, I'm aware that they're out there, but I don't think I've been to any church that has closed communion. And every time I've been to a church that has open communion, I've always partaken, because this is the greater body of Christ coming together. This isn't a subset of the body taking communion together. And so that's always been my kind of thing with it. And I think because of that, I've been able to avoid, some of those, potential pitfalls with, the Mountain Dew and stale donuts, or the Mountain Dew and, M&Ms or whatever it is. So, but I would honestly have to go back and think through that and process through that and pray through that more if I was ever going to be in a position where that was going to be put before me. If I ever full-time stepped into a youth group position, I would definitely want to be looking through that. All the times I've been working with youth groups, it's been internship and under guidance and direction with someone else. It's always been co-leading with someone. So if I was kind of the person where everything was on me, I would have to really think through that. And actually, that brings up something else, because I know Greg and his good friend Matt Smith do a youth retreat every year. And so I would have to ask him if they do communion. I don't think they do, but I would have to ask him if they've ever done it at their conference. Have you ever been part of that type of thing where you found yourself, I was planning on doing this and I don't have what I was hoping I'd have, and so either bailing or going through with it, regretting it later?
Well, I think in that other app, I think I talked about the time that they called me when I was on vacation. My deacons called me and said, we don't have any more of the tiny little plastic cups. And I was like, hey, good. They destroy the environment. But we were kind of, they were in a quandary, and they said, like, do we do it, or do we wait till next week, or what? Mm-hmm. And there's some mosquitoes out here, and there's eastern equine encephalitis in our area. Maybe I should go back in.
Run away.
To the Nakatomi smoke room.
That's right.
But in that case, I said, why don't you just take the chalice, fill it with the grape juice, and have people come forward and do it by intinction?
Yeah.
In which case, they overruled me after we hung up and said that seemed, quote unquote, too Catholic to two of them who were ex-Catholics, so they just didn't do it. But there's also been times when they tell me, kind of 11th hour, as we've already got the whole, they've set everything up. Oh yeah, we found that it was accidentally grape drink, not, and so it's like, less than 2% fruit juice or whatever.
Right.
And to me, I even that, like, I see on everyone's face that instead of a moment of reflection, there's this sort of like, whoa,
right,
that was really sweet. And then this moment of like chuckling to themselves, and they're totally taken out of it. And I mean, what's the point of it at that point? If it's not going to draw you in, it's going to kind of drag you out of the moment. I think anything like that, especially if it came to something extreme like subbing in soda or something, it wouldn't tend to draw you in. And I don't think I have license to change these things. Like, just like I wouldn't change it from water to something else for baptism, or change the formula in any way for baptism. I don't think I would be willing. I think if they came to me and said, it was just there's just grape Kool-Aid. Should we fill them? I'd say no.
Mm-hmm.
That's my, and I don't think it's necessarily quote unquote invalid
Mm-hmm.
if someone goes through with that. But I'd prefer and wait. We can still do
Right.
it once a month. We've got 3 other weeks.
Right.
If it's somebody who has weekly communion and they're like, should we break with that tradition or not? That's a different question. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a secondary thing at
Right.
best. But it's definitely worth thinking through.
Right.
That and I think the question then on a much lower level remains for a church where they're still using like oyster crackers or
Right.
something to say, you can't break that in half. Hold it up and break it in half and kind of show the symbolism of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to have a bunch of those like styrofoam wafers with the cross on them,
Yep.
perfectly round ones, that I would use for home communion. And then one day I was like, wait a minute, we've got all these leftovers
Right.
on communion Sundays. Put those in a Ziploc bag, put them in the freezer, and I just use those. So what's really beautiful then is the symbolism of this is from the very same loaf that
Right.
everyone else used. It reminds you that this is the very same. It's the same communion, even though it's a different time and place.
Right.
It's still the same body, and like you say, it's still a universal communion. So
Yeah.
it ties you into the congregation, even if you're not able to leave your home and be
Right.
there at that moment.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, I'd have to think long and hard about what I, would consider, and obviously under the church as well. Let's say I start working as a full-time youth pastor for Christ Fellowship. That would be something that I want to make sure, hey, talking with Greg, talking with the elders, what would be our stance as a church? Because even as a church, they might decide, yeah, we're not going to parcel out communion like that. We don't do communion separate in our Bible studies and community groups. We do it as a body together. And so wanting to make sure that, okay, we're all on the same page as far as that goes. But then there might be other churches that say, hey, if you are, in a community group or in a Bible study and you're talking about this and you want to partake of it, then yeah, you have our blessing to go ahead and do that. And this is what we just, have as our guidelines for it, so I think each church is going to vary on that. And I think part of it is going to depend on, like you said, what they're used to and accustomed to in a lot of ways. For that process, so if you're used to doing wine and all of a sudden you switch to grape juice, you're gonna notice some differences in there, and vice versa. And so definitely, I think whenever you change something, there's going to be a sense of it's going to momentarily draw you out of the experience because it's new, it's different, and that's a natural reaction, for any of us. But I think overall, if, your mindset is still, okay, this is why we're doing it, and I still do understand the importance of it in that context, then, those are things that can be easily worked around.
Well, I think we've solved the world problems yet again.
Awesome.
And all those of the church. So
what's there left to talk about? Oh, man. But we do have some other things to talk about, Zach.
You know what? I'm going to stand up, and I'm actually going to make my way into my home.
Okay.
On account of the mosquitoes are coming out already.
All right. Well, as you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and talk for a little bit, unless you think I'm going to lose you.
No. Here we go.
All right.
So
you and I were kind of going through some things today, and we've been trying to decide what we're going to do because we came to the conclusion we're not going to be able to record next week. I will be out of town, and so we were trying to figure, can we do 2-episode recording? And so you were like, hey, I've got the ability to do a 2-episode recording if we do XYZ. Here are some topics. What do you think about that? I think what we're going to do is actually just make this one a little longer and break it in half, and then we'll just release it in 2 parts. But the next thing that I was fascinated about was this, and I'm just going to read it straight from your text message because we've touched on this in terms of, I think, talking about the problem, but not some of the solutions or how to avoid the trap falls of this. And so you had just texted and said, I'm getting more into Jeff Durbin's stuff. Have a weird feeling that if I lift him up too high, it will make him fall. I don't think we ever discussed the right way to look up to someone without idolizing them, or whether there is an inherent danger to looking up to someone which can't be avoided. And I think that's great, because I think you're right. I don't think we've ever truly discussed how to avoid the pitfalls of that. Let me ask you a question specifically pertaining to this. Zach, have you been communicating with Durbin?
No, I mean, I haven't interacted with him. I've been following Apologia Studios for years, and I've been into his stuff. I love what he does with kind of unborn and trying to preach the gospel to people who might be getting an abortion. I love his kind of snark, and I assume you also are into him giving his background. Do you know his background?
No, I don't.
Oh my gosh, dude, look into this a little bit. This guy, world champion martial artist.
Oh, wow.
He did like the Hollywood stuff. He had his own karate schools. He has black belts in several different disciplines. And even like video games. Yeah. Like you play some video games and you're actually, the motion capture on a lot of the stuff is him. Like Mortal Kombat and like Ninja Turtles. Yeah, like he's Donatello and Michelangelo and stuff. So he's had quite a career in that stuff. And also at the same time, his life was a disaster. Mm-hmm. He was doing ecstasy, and his marriage was falling apart. And then he got saved, and God called him into ministry. And so he's really got an interesting background. One of our listeners on our discussion group had posted about a thing where a debate where he was teaming up with James White. Yeah. And I watched that, and it was fascinating. One of the atheist guys, like afterward, was like getting in his face and like wouldn't move aside, and I'm like, oh, this is such an interesting thing. I mean, Durbin could literally just like wheel kick this guy into the next century, and he's just so meek, and meekness being like power that's controlled, right? Not being weakness, but being like a stallion that chooses not to trample you, and to see that kind of change in his heart and know what he's all about now, I really dig him. I don't think his like weekly news comedy thing he was trying to do was very funny, right? But I respect the crap out of him trying to do it, because he just saw this need, and I think he is a pretty funny guy, and a pretty what they put out it's culturally astute. And I just like it. So I'm going like, as my sort of fanboyness grows, I'm going, now hold on, Zach. You've just seen a bunch of people fall, and I don't really, that was meant to be tongue in cheek. I don't really think me like holding him up is going to make him fall, but like, right. I just have this weird irrational fear of it. Yeah. Like after, especially everybody, when Harris fell, everybody away from the faith and everything. He described it himself as falling away. Everybody said, this is just another reminder, it's not about any man. And it's true, but, there's a certain amount of safety in looking up to someone like Spurgeon, because they might discover something, but probably not. He's not going to turn around and disappoint us tomorrow. Right. But I don't want to live in a world where I'm not allowed to look up to someone and say, I really appreciate that guy. I follow his stuff. I trust it. I think he's cool. I'm sort of, in a sense, a disciple, not meaning instead of Jesus, but like following Jesus along a similar path, and going, here's somebody who's just really, who's prominent and who's doing well, who seems to have a sense of humility. And I don't know, I have this like knee-jerk reaction, like pendulum swing now, where I don't want to follow anybody, right? And follow Jesus after anybody. I've got to go lone wolf it and make sure that anybody whose sermons I like is just like super under the radar and the opposite of famous. And I don't know. I feel like there's got to be a right way to look up to people without idolizing them. What do you think are some of the safeguards we can put in place? And I think maybe a difference between, say, us and Doc and Devo, those guys who threw us under the bus.
I know, right?
Yesterday, guys, is that they would have written out like an article and they would just go through it back and forth. Whereas, we're just going to have a discussion.
Right.
So it may not be as polished, but like in your life, there are people you look up to who aren't your pastor, or maybe even when it is your pastor.
Sure.
How do you make sure that's not going to turn into, if they fell, it would shipwreck your faith, and B, you're contributing to / enabling someone getting puffed up, and doing them a disservice.
Yeah, man, it is hard because, I think this is going to make me sound so something. I don't know if it's going to make me sound good, bad, or what. It's going to make me sound something.
Probably bad.
Probably. I mean, well, that's all right. That just gives us more fodder for the podcast, right? Honestly, I don't have heroes like that. I love Greg. I love Greg's preaching. Greg and I are good friends. If I were to find out some horrible scandal were to break about Greg, I would be sad that my friend has done this. This is, I have a relationship with him. That's not going to stop the relationship that I have with him in my friendship. Now, that will change the dynamic of his pastoral care over me, absolutely. But that doesn't change my friendship and my relationship with him. And that's not going to, in one sense, make me look at him any differently. It will cause me, and I say this because things like this have happened before to me. And when I was very young, I used to hear about these stories, and then when they actually happened, it was completely just mind-blowing and devastating. And it's not that I've become numb to it and I'm like, there's just no point and no hope. No, I mean, I form very tight bonds with people, and I have close friendships with people. And there are people that I do look up to and trust and respect. And I constantly am referring and talking. I have ties down in Charlotte, North Carolina, ties through my wife who grew up down there. In fact, the old church she used to attend is where KDY now preaches. Like, that was her church growing up. And on the other side, I have family who is very involved in elevation and knows Ferdy and everything very well. I have always said, and that there's, we did a whole podcast on things that I, thought Kevin DeYoung just should have remained silent on. I mean, we did that podcast, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago now? And I would still, if, it were to come down to it between the two churches, I would still go, and visit KDY's church, because I know the type of preacher that he is, that I've come to expect. He's someone that I would still listen to, on a regular basis. Let's say some big scandal breaks about him. That wouldn't necessarily make him rise or drop in my mind in terms of, who he is. Now, let's say he dropped to the point of, maliciousness and really just, like let's take Josh Harris, who has just totally come out and thrown everything he believed by the wayside. My investment in Josh Harris was fairly substantial because I read several of his books. I saw him speak on a number of occasions, but it wasn't like devastating because I wasn't putting everything in him. It's sad to me because to me he's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. He's throwing everything out in his attempts to do whatever. And so for me with him, it's kind of like I've used this as sad. There are a lot of people who are very close friends with him. They're mourning this relationship that is being devastated because, the things that should be at your core and have in common with this person, he's totally flat out, rejecting and pushing away. But somebody comes out and, there's this scandalous sin and it's like, man, they're broken over this. And, they turn around and have this point of repentance. It's still my friend. This is still, I'm sad because of everything that is now going to impact them and their family on such a deep level. And that breaks my heart. But in terms of who they are as a person, that really isn't changing. Does any of that make sense, or are you just sitting there like, man, you're out of it. Let me go ahead and talk for a few minutes.
Well, no, what I'm hearing you say is that you don't really have an answer because you don't really have a problem to be answered because I don't know why. Why do you think it is that you don't tend to, gravitate toward, say, when he was alive, R.C. Sproul, or I know you've talked about Alistair Begg, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Sure.
I would think. I'm not like doing what all these guys at the Doc and Devo conference seem to be doing, where I'm trying to model my look and sound and vibe
Right.
after Jeff Durbin. I can't grow that kind of beard.
Right.
It's so the way that you kind of tend toward if someone. If you're going to quote someone, or if you're going to read someone, or if you're going to listen to someone on the radio, it's a hero in the sense that it's a hero in the faith. It's somebody who makes you want to be a better Christian, and it's someone who seems to have some answers and not have it all figured out, but they know they're very skilled at pointing you toward the same Jesus that they're following and that is helping them be sanctified in a way that's helpful.
Yeah.
And they're even in that, I think that's how most of these things start.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, there are people for whom that's the main thing, that
Right.
that whole vibe. The
Yeah.
people who they get the 1689 tattoo, and I'm not talking about Joe Thorne, but they get the John Calvin tattoo. They shave their head bald and wear the Righteous Wretch T-shirt,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And it's more about that. They care more about that image than they care about actually following Jesus. There are a few of those out there, but
Yeah.
for the most part, I think it starts in the same way. Like one of our first podcasts was, who are some of our heroes? And
Sure.
you had answers then. I don't remember exactly who they were, but
Well, yeah, and so I mean, I guess the point of having heroes, yes, but in terms of them, what happens in terms of if they fall, I don't know that so much is worrisome to me. And I mean, but I guess part of that is because I assume they're going to fall, and I mean, hopefully, not huge, but like, I mean, David, I love David. David's always been one of my heroes of the faith in the Bible.
Based on what I saw on Twitter this week, you're not allowed to love David. So,
well, when God stops calling him a man after his own heart, I'll stop loving him. So, but I mean, but David, I've always loved him because it's a very real example of a man who had so many very visible struggles and very visible outwardly sins, even, against a nation. And yet his heart for turning back to God and repentance was just so strong. And so for me, like if somebody like that is one of my heroes in the Bible, I mean, and all the stuff that he did, and I read what Paul says, I'm the chief of all sinners, and Paul is, one of my heroes. And so if I'm reading what these people are saying and what these people are doing and what is being written about them under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and I believe this stuff to be true, then I've got to believe that that the stuff that they do doesn't stop them from being like this. David doesn't stop being a man after God's own heart and, arguing, did he rape Bathsheba? Was it consensual? And making all those arguments and going through all that stuff. It doesn't change the fact that God still called this man, he still said he was a man after his own heart. And so, the question then becomes, so it wasn't the bad stuff that he did, and it wasn't, necessarily the good stuff that he did. It was the righteousness of, Christ that was over him, future, past tense, all that, stuff. And so to me, I do. I have heroes. Alistair Begg. I could sit here and I could name several heroes, and I could, we could go back to that podcast and those would still be my heroes. But I don't think that there's anything that they could do to, again, I guess unless you're talking about like, Josh Harris, who's just totally like, I'm done with all this stuff. And I mean, in this case, he ceases to be a hero because he's, but it's not devastating to me to lose that. I feel sad for him, and I pray for him that he will come to recognize the truth again of the things that he used to believe.
Yeah, me too. And yet, even if someone's not saying, my faith is grounded in their faith, because then you have vicarious faith at that point. You have what the medieval church taught, which was if you just say, I'm with the church, whatever the church's doctrine is, you don't even have to know what it is. You're covered. You're good. Right. And, instead of like the modern 21st century American individualist way to do that is to say, I'm with this guy and his brand. Right. And I may not even know exactly. And I one time had somebody who was fairly involved with our church and left to another church, and the church was a little bit wonky. I'm not going to say what tradition it was, but I'm going to say it was on the outskirts where even in like the early 20th century, the SBC was putting out pamphlets to warn against this group as a cult. And I said, do you know what they teach about baptism? And this person just stopped me and said, whatever it is, we're for it. I'm going, okay. Certainly that is one way to check yourself when you're kind of placing yourself in somebody's sphere and in their camp, to say, now hold on, I'm not going to just rubber stamp whatever they say. Yeah. And I've gone through a few, like when I was newly a Calvinist. So this is during seminaries. This is more than 20 years ago. There were a few people, like all the guys on the White Horse Inn. I said, yeah, that's my stuff. I've listened to a bunch of them, and it just sounds like it's like drinking sweet, pure water after having sort of been downing, something out of plastic bottles where you can just taste the carcinogens, Right. and so it was so refreshing to me. I just kind of like, if you want to know what I believe, listen to these guys. Mm-hmm. And then a couple of them said stuff. There was no fall. It wasn't heretical. It was just like, I grew a little more in my faith. I had learned an awful lot about the Bible and my own tradition, and started to think, I have to be critical about what I hear, even from them. I still think they're great men of the faith. I would still love to meet them, and in shaking their hand, I wouldn't try and downplay that I was a little starstruck. I won't think that'd be sinful. Right. I would be like, wow, this is super cool. Right. Just like when Greg had that weird little kismet thing where he bumped into Sproul. Sure. And had that in. And there's a sense of, wow, this is a brush with a great man of God. It's okay, but you're going to have to I'm going to make sure that everything you say is in keeping with the scripture. I'm never going to get to that point where, and I think there's a great danger to when people keep encountering followers who just, whatever you say, that's good enough for me. Yeah. They tend to think that of themselves eventually. It's a danger anyway. It's a temptation. Right. So that's one way I think, is to just say, I'm never going to get to a point where this person becomes a capital A authority for me.
Right.
I will maybe put more stock in what they say. If someone, even with something like, I've known people who, when they encounter Bible difficulties, whether it's Josh McDowell or Lee Strobel or even somebody like oh good grief, who's that guy? Matt Slick or somebody, where they go, I go to that person and they fix it for me and they take away the bad feeling that Bible well, hold on though.
Right.
You want to struggle with it too.
Right.
There's something good in that, in struggling with these things yourself.
Right.
And if you just let someone else's spiritual experience, because he's a big shot, become your own, that vicariousness, I think it's bad news. And then the other one is if it ever becomes divisive, right? I mean, when I say it's okay to follow Jesus after certain people, in the tradition of certain people, that's okay. That was going on in the book of Acts in a good way, but it was going on in Corinth in a bad way.
Right.
I follow Apollos. I follow Peter. I follow Paul. Oh no, well, I follow Christ. So and if we see that starting to happen, and that's happening so much now too. I follow J.D. Hall.
Right.
Well, to begin with, you're rethink that move, son. But or I'm more of into these dangerous Harley looking guys, because that's my background. But no, I'm a more blue blazers and khakis guy. And
right.
we divide over these stupid things instead of saying, you know what? Probably all these guys have something good for me to learn.
Sure.
And guys being gender inclusive, right. I'll read Jen Wilkin. I will listen to Beth Moore, and I'm definitely not going to stop binging through an awful lot of sermons from Sinclair Ferguson. And you know what? Some of these people probably wouldn't want to be associated with each other.
Right.
But there's goodness to be gleaned from all of them. And when I stop viewing them in that way, as I can be blessed because God's using people, and start thinking of them as, this is my source of how I'm going to think about the Bible, how I'm going to approach every issue, there's a danger in that too, I think.
Right. Yeah, and I think, more to what I was saying a little earlier, I was thinking more along the lines of what do you do, if this scandalous thing happens? Like, what do you do on your end? Because again, it is me listening to Beth Moore, Jeff Durbin, these people, unless I have a relationship with them or I know them or I'm part of their congregation, I'm not necessarily feeding the ego and the star status in them. I mean, I might be contributing in some way if I'm buying materials from them and things like that. But I mean, if I all of a sudden start listening to, does Beth Moore have a podcast? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay. But let's say she did and I started listening to it. Me listening to her podcast isn't necessarily going to, in effect, bump up her ego. I mean, I guess it could, if she's like, oh, there's another listener on my, on my count. But I feel like the star status is from what you're talking about. It's these people who benefit and they start overpraising the things that they're doing. It becomes more than, man, I appreciate this message because of X, Y, Z. It's, oh my gosh, you are the best in the world. And I mean, come on. I mean, that's got to feed into the ego so much. And so when you're on that broader platform, I would assume it would become ultra difficult for that person, to stay humble and to, stay grounded and centered in Christ and in the Word of God. But I don't know. Those are my thoughts on it.
All right. Yeah, and for the most part, I think that's a crowd thing. Like, no one person can make or break someone's view of themselves. But in the shadow of a million different warnings not to, overexalt any man or
Right.
woman. So you're just saying you have no interest in kind of putting yourself, if someone says describe your religious views to me, you're like, all right, hold on, I'm going to read you the statement of faith from Christ Fellowship, or I'm going to just wing it and kind of describe the Baptistic non-denom doctrine.
Yeah.
Or could you possibly say, I don't know, are you familiar with X? Like, I mean, I honestly could say, I really like James White.
Yeah.
I really appreciate a lot of what I hear. Matt Chandler. If you listen to that kind of stuff, you hear sort of a lot of the same sorts of things that I emphasize and value.
Sure.
And is that intrinsically dangerous? I guess was kind of my sub question there.
Sure. I don't think it is intrinsically dangerous to say, yeah, if you want to know what I think and what I believe, this sums it up very well, or if you're familiar with this person and you listen to them, that we have similar thoughts and ideas on these things. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. I think you hit it on the head when you asked, like, who could I point to? I mean, there's a lot of different things, and I think part of it just has to do with my background. I grew up in very extreme denominational situations, all throughout my growing up and formative years. Very extreme and different denominational situation. I mean, when I was, first introduced into the church setting, we were in a Nazarene church. I can remember being in a Salvation Army church for a number of years. I can remember growing up and being in Baptist church for a number of years. I can remember being in Assemblies of God and Assemblies of God / non-denominational. I can remember most of my teenage years was spent in an Advent Christian church.
I don't even know what that one is.
So
I've got a degree in religion.
So the basic tenet is the main difference would be they believe in soul sleep. So that would be their big distinction in the faith is they believe in soul sleep.
I think Luther did too, didn't he?
I think so. Yeah, one of them did. One of the bigger reformers did. When I was in college, I went to a Wesleyan church. When I came. When I was right out of college, I was in a Southern Baptist church, and now I'm in a more Reformed church. And so my formation of many, having all those different backgrounds over the years, like if you were to point to one thing that I, like, okay, who do you most align with? I would probably say I most closely align with Reformed Baptists, except for the fact that there are several key things in there that we differ greatly on. Mainly women's role in the church. So I haven't quite found someone where it's like, hey, we could sit here and agree on, X, Y, Z, and, this is who I most closely align with. And I think part of that too is, even after being and doing this podcast, I mean, you go into a lot of the Reformed communities out there online, and it's like, they have 101 different things that they think Reformed means. And it's like, well, you got to believe all these things. You got to follow this confession. And then you go to another group and you got to believe these things and you got to follow this confession. And so, like, to me, I think there's a lot of hodgepodge out there, or there's a lot of people trying to streamline, doctrinal statements so much that even in some of the minor things, they just become so major. And I don't know if that, in all honesty, I don't know if that has kind of soured me a little bit on like trying to find a hero that I can be like, hey, this is who I most agree with. You know, Greg and I agree on a lot of things, but we also disagree on a lot of things.
Name three.
One is the role of women in the church. Another
Suss
one.
that out. Suss it.
So I actually have no issue with women preaching on Sundays. That doesn't bother me at all. If a woman were to stand up and give a sermon on a Sunday, I'd have no problem with that whatsoever. So, short and sweet, that would kind of be one thing. And there are a lot of other nuances. Actually, if you want to know more specifically, you can go back and listen to one that Greg and I did, 4 years ago or whenever it was. So that would definitely be one. Another one would be, while I say I most closely associate with Reformed Baptists, it doesn't bother me, and I could very easily, attend a church that sprinkles instead of immerses.
Whoa!
I know, right? You're ready to quit me, aren't you, Zach?
Podcast is over.
We're done. This is the last one, folks.
And you would sprinkle with the flat Mountain Dew.
That's right. Now, with that, I do believe that immersion is the biblical form of baptism, but it wouldn't stop me from going to a church that sprinkles. That's not a showstopper for me. Like, this is what I agree with, but for Greg, that was actually kind of a showstopper for him when deciding to join the Presbyterian church. To me, that's not a showstopper. So that would be another one, and then a third one. I would say I'd get back to you next week, but this episode is probably going to air next week. So
the King James Bible, Greg doesn't recognize any other Bible as authoritative.
No, we're ESV all the way, baby.
When you trot out things, even with your own pastor, that you're not 100,000% on the same page, mm-hmm. I think it points out one more danger, mm-hmm. And that is if you with any leader, mm-hmm. if you allow that association, especially if it's with somebody who's very well known for a few emphases. Yeah. And that tends to happen with people with big platforms.
Sure.
I've brought up the example a number of times of like Jack Van Impe, mm-hmm. General Baptist teaching from this guy and emphasis on memorizing scriptures of all types. And then over time, he slowly realizes, I put butts in the seats. I put the numbers, the people tuning in, if I'm all about the end times. So people mm-hmm. who kind of find what it is that gets the most reaction for them, and they roll with it, they're not likely to evolve much. They're going to stay on those issues. They're going to stay on their talking points. And if we too tightly hitch ourselves to a hero here and there, especially when much of what makes you gravitate toward a hero might be their vibe, mm-hmm. their way of speaking and communicating, even like their fashion sense these days.
Oh yeah.
It's so arbitrary to then say, okay, I'm not going to ever move beyond this.
Yes.
And if you're not willing to break with your sort of paper popes, and say, I still respect the heck out of that person, but it's not really where I am anymore.
Yeah.
Then you've given them too much power, because they are able to kind of arrest your spiritual development when they probably don't even want to, but just by virtue of I'm so bought in now.
Right.
The fallacy of having of sunken costs. Like I've already. I don't think there's any problem with buying someone's merch or buying their books or even
sure.
like the T-shirts and stuff. In fact, you should go buy These Go to 11 T-shirt right now.
Absolutely.
But from missionalwear.com. But to say I've given myself total permission to break with any of their positions, and to someday in 2 or 3 years say, you know what, I'm no longer in that season of my life where that person is speaking to me what I need to hear. They were at a time, and they helped me move forward.
Yep.
But now I'm somewhere else, and that naturally seems to happen apart from this massive reach that media has right now, social and otherwise.
Right.
So I think that's a good kind of third, I want to say guardrail to put in place. And I don't know where a third guardrail goes if you're on a road. But
it's the median.
Yeah, it's the one that keeps you from going into oncoming traffic. Right? It is you've got to be willing to, and I would even, and this may be more controversial, but I would say, and I know R. Scott Clark, Ricky Scott, would definitely disagree with this rather vehemently, and his ilk, which is one reason, ironically, why I've kind of distanced myself from some of that set, even like your confessions that you hold to.
Yeah.
When you read in the scriptures, it's important, yes, to remember I'm part of a confessional community if you subscribe to a confession, but they're not the Bible.
Right.
And if you come across something, like you say, you have a few things where you don't 100% agree with your pastor, and I would hope everybody at my church probably has a couple things where they're like, yeah, when he says that, it makes me go to the scriptures, but it hasn't quite convinced me.
Right.
That's good. That you're driving. It's driving you to the scriptures. But someone like let's at random pick. Joe Thorne. He on that program they'll actually say again and again, like, we love the 1689. There's a couple things in there that we think are a little off.
Right.
And I think that is a very healthy relationship to have, or to say, I'm convinced by all of it, but to say I'm open to at some point saying, you know what, at this point I have to say I can sign my name to that with one tiny asterisk. Oh no, end of the world, right?
Right.
As long as you're not saying, I would rather say I have an asterisk when I sign my name at the bottom of the Philadelphia Baptist Confession or whatever, then I have to put these asterisks on the scriptures.
Right.
To say I twist my understanding of it to fit this document.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me ask you this question, Zach. So let's say, there is someone that you're following, you're geeking out on them hard, and they do fall away, or they do fall out of grace, whatever it might be. Is their stuff all of a sudden now all tainted to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think it should be. Like when Tullian's stuff was all ripped down from a bunch of different things. I think Roseborough kept up a couple things of his and got some. I may be wrong, but I think it was him, and I think it was with Tullian Trevigian, and got some flack for it. And he was like, "Why would I take it down? It's solid." And if it wasn't with Tullian, it was definitely Roseborough. This stuff, everything comes from the mouth of a sinner. And God can speak. God spoke through a donkey once. He can speak through any person. And if it's truth. Now, if it's Tullian Trevigian on being a faithful husband, probably just take it down because of the irony value.
Right.
But at the same time, dude, I think it does sort of become tainted in my mind. Like I couldn't use it very much just because it would bum me out too much, and I would. Like, I don't even listen to MXPX anymore, which was a band I was obsessed with for 2 decades, because I found out that they kind of disavowed the Christianity. And it's not that I think their music's worse now. It's just that it bums me out. The albums I used to put in all the time from the 90s,
yeah, I
hear them talking to unbelievers, and I'm going, everything you're saying to these people, you need to hear now. And it doesn't pep me up and get me going like it used to. It drags me down.
Yeah.
If there was stuff that I used to listen to, Mike Warnke's comedy, and when he was discovered that he was just lying about it and using it to make money and kind of a con guy, I put it all in a drawer somewhere, and I haven't found it again. It rang false to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, Joshua Harris's book should be chucked because it's unbiblical, not because he fell away. If tomorrow it came out that R.C. Sproul had 7 mistresses, one in every port, it would blow my stinking mind.
Right.
Like I'm not in the shoes it sounds like you're in, where nothing would faze you because you're ready for everyone to fall away. I'm not. Like it would really trip me up. Mm-hmm. But I would not delete all of my vast archive of Renewing Your Mind. I wouldn't throw away all of the many R.C. Sproul books that I have that have really filled me with, because they're still full of God's truth.
Right. Yeah. No, and I agree 100%. I think it is important, to, remember that truth is truth. And it doesn't matter whether it's, like you said, if it's coming out of the mouth of a donkey or, people are acting like donkeys, it's still, truth is still truth. And we need to remember that any truth that is worth us holding on to is going to be grounded in Scripture and is going to be grounded in the Word of God. And so that's ultimately what it should go back to was the truth that was spoken, coming from God's Word. It doesn't matter the mouthpiece that it was coming from. It's was it God's Word that it was grounded in and soaked in? Does it still ring true from that perspective?
I still even read some of the books written by who was that guy? David, King David.
Yeah.
Even after he got thrown under. Here's a real example though. R.C. Sproul Jr.
Yeah.
Who there was all sorts of weird stuff with him. One thing was this Ashley Madison. This was years ago.
Right.
Ashley Madison, in which a case I was like, wow. Even in falling, this guy blew me away with his sense of grace, where he barely fell. His wife had died. He was in a super dark, lonely place.
Yeah.
And he was he used an old email, logged into that hookup site for 45 seconds. It was confirmed he never did anything on it. He was just like, what am I doing? He logged out and he never went back in.
Yeah.
But then when the hack happened, he said, this, I'm not going to ever deny this. This might come out. It probably won't. It's a weird, obscure email, but I'm convicted. I did this, and I'm choosing to step away from the ministry for a year or something.
Right.
Then a couple other things came out with him with different issues. I'm not even gonna go through them. But I still show regularly a DVD called Amazing Grace: The History and Theology of Calvinism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of the both of the Dr. Sproul are on it. I think some of the most brilliant stuff comes from R.C. Jr.
Yeah.
I mean, he's even got into the infant, the paedo communion stuff and everything. And I'm not on the same page with him there.
Sure.
But when he talks about the 5 points of Calvinism, well, it's great. And so, I think one of the beautiful things of being a Christian is we are all acknowledging right out of the gate, we're all broken vessels.
Right.
And so I'm going to take everything with the person who's speaking gets the grain of salt, not what they've said necessarily, as long as what they say comports with the Word of God and is subject to it.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's funny. This is why I prefaced the beginning of my statement with, I don't know how this is going to make me sound, but, I don't want it to make it sound like I show no emotion and I.
You don't cry.
Well, that's true. That is true. I don't cry.
You know what? I'm going to add a rule on the discussion group under "Don't Mess with Nathan." He's a purple belt. 20 bonus points for anyone who can make Nathan cry.
Oh man. Oh boy, that's hysterical. But at the same time, there's some messed up stuff going on in the Bible with people God chooses. And you look at that section in Hebrews, the heroes of the faith. There's a lot of messed up people in there, and they do a lot of messed up stuff, and yet God still uses them. And so I've really come to the point where I don't I don't want to be shocked per se at the depravity of man. You know, that, yeah, I mean, it is strong. And even for believers, you know, the things that we can find ourselves in is can be devastating. And so, you know, spiritually, and I mean, it can be devastating physically too. But I don't want to ever be at the point where, you know, like it causes me, and I think this is the most key thing. I don't want to be to the point where it causes me to totally reject the person who sinned because I'm in such shock at the fact that a human sinned, you know, because those are some of the things that I remember experiencing growing up. Was like this person sinned, and all of a sudden they were the leper and the outcast, that now God's grace couldn't touch them because of what they had done. And I remember even being young and hearing some of those things and being frustrated with that, you know, and again, I think part of it too is maybe I am a little desensitized because of experiences and things like that in people falling. I would hope it's not like, oh, I'm just not going to expect anything from anyone. You know, I mean, I do have, you know, relationships with people that I would consider heroes of the faith. I have distant relationship with people that I consider heroes of the faith. And I have what I would consider, you know, a one-sided relationship where, you know, I know they exist and I listen to their stuff. But I never want to get to the point where if one of my heroes falls, that it shakes me, or it shakes to an extent that relationship that I have with them.
Yeah, and I mean, you told me that Alistair Begg called you about that loan you gave him. He
still hasn't paid me back.
The thing with Alistair Begg is that accent is infallible. Whether he is infallible morally, it's pretty clear.
Right.
Nobody is, but that accent, man, can do no wrong.
That's right.
And you start bringing in like the Gettys singing with that guy, and you know that brings up a whole other issue we could have gone, which would be musicians and stuff. But
right.
But you know, with all these people, there may be a rock star, but they have the same struggles we do. And I think at the end of the day, if there's just one rule, if you just bear that in mind,
yeah,
then you're not going to wind up, you know, it's not dangerous to look up to people,
right?
Not to put them on a pedestal or on an altar and make them an idol, but to look up to people. If you never do that, I fear you're going to miss out on being challenged. Even Paul, he admits he's the chief of all sinners, right? And then he says, emulate me while I emulate Christ.
Right, exactly.
Well, I emulate Christ, but, you know, do it. So I think that's a good place to bring that. Can I make a suggestion, and then can I make a plug?
Sure.
Suggestion is maybe just leave this one big long episode, and people can cut it in half if they want to.
Okay, that's fair.
Because
I'm good with that.
I don't want to make any extra work for you, and I don't know where it would naturally break. And the plug is, I know that I've already talked about it, but people have got to see The Chosen. I've been showing it Wednesday through October. We've been watching it. People have been blown away by it. If you go to studios.vidangel.com/the-chosen, or just Google The Chosen, you can watch these things for free. Yep. And my gosh, this is the kind of tool that would make someone who's never really thought about Jesus, to whom Jesus doesn't seem like a real person who ever walked the earth, I think would really connect with them and make them start thinking about Jesus' claims. And I think even more likely it's going to, like a lot of people whose faith has started to feel a little bit dry, mm-hmm. it has a chance to re-moisten it with their tears.
Yeah.
I mean, not yours so much, but but other people.
The average person.
The average person who
feels things,
is movable.
The non-robots out there.
Have you seen any of it yet?
No.
You got to check it. Dude, watch it with your wife. It's so good. It's one of those things where a Christian didn't rush either in his career by like going, oh, I want to make movies and I just got my film degree and so I'm going to, raise a little money and go, or in, this particular project. It's clearly just the product of tons of time, tons of skill, amazing performances. The music is done mainly by the guy from Jars of Clay, Dan Hasseltine.
Okay, nice.
It's as good production wise, writing wise, performance wise as anything you can watch on Netflix or Amazon Prime.
Sweet.
And it's great. I'd like to, if there are some people in the These Go to 11 discussion group who have watched it, I'd like to see some discussions about, what has really spoken to them about it, because I want to talk about it. When I watch things, I want to talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
People that, if I can't, then that steals 90% of the fun of watching them.
Right.
So if you ever get a chance to watch it, especially if you can watch it with your wife, or watch it with your wife and your boy there. I don't know. Do you still have time with a 18-year-old or 17-year-old or whatever, or is his social life?
Oh no, he's in college right now.
Okay, so does he have time to? Is he with you still, living with you?
No, he's in Illinois.
Oh no, I'm sorry, man. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, he went to he got accepted to the University of Illinois, so he's out there.
Do you still see him?
Not so far. He's a typical teenager in some respects, where he could very well show up on our door the week of Thanksgiving break without telling us. So,
nice.
So that's just kind of where he's at. But we hope to see him at some point.
Yeah, well, I would hope after having a relationship for years
right.
and living in the same home that you would see him again. Well, if you do happen to be able to see this, I think it would be an awesome topic for us to discuss for an episode too.
Okay.
Because there is the question of it's the plot of it is largely fictional.
Right. Okay.
They put all these different things going on in the lives of the disciples that they're guessing at, and I think it's an interesting discussion. Is that okay? How much is that okay? Is it going to confuse people? So check it out, and everybody listening, check it out. Tell me what you think. Tell us what you think about this brand of, not just saying we're going to retell the Gospels again as a movie, but we're going to make a TV show that says, what if? What might this have looked like? How might these people who all lived in Capernaum, which is this teeny tiny little town, if you go there, you're blown away by how small it is. Mm-hmm. How might they have brushed shoulders with each other in everyday life? What might they have thought about each other before they all started following the same Jesus? It's fascinating stuff.
Nice. All right, I will definitely plan to put that on my list so we can do a podcast on it. I will definitely keep that in mind. We are, right at an hour and a half here. We still have one more thing we could talk about, Zach. I don't know if you got to go quite yet.
I probably have 7 minutes.
Okay, well then let's not bring up that one more thing yet. We'll save it for some other time. I have a feeling that that's going to take a little bit longer than 7 minutes, so we'll save it for another time.
All righty.
But no, this has been great, and I feel like it was one of our better ones. I was excited as we were talking about this. So, let's see what the people think. People, throw it up on the discussion board. Do you think this was one of the better ones, or what do you think was the best podcast we've done so far?
Yep.
No hints, Zach. No hints. All right. Well, don't forget to rate us on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, any place that you listen. Please rate and review us. It helps, drive that up a little bit so that people can find us easier. And other than that, Zach, we just rocked the Casbah.
These go to 11.